So, James 4 is a great book. I'm excited about James 5. But as it starts out, it just made me think, how many of us like asking for help?
Right.
I don't think anybody, how many here like asking for help? I don't really like asking for help.
Never. No.
No.
Sorry.
So like, how about this? How many of us like asking for help from a person after we just trashed them in the parking lot? How about that? How do we feel about that? Most of us are probably the person that got trashed that get asked help for. That's fine. As we pass that out, this will make sense, right? And I think I got that up. If I didn't get it on the Bible app, I'm very, very sorry.
Is it 10?
I just thought about that. I may have forgotten that. So tonight, as James is talking about this, we've talked about James, we've talked about him being the brother of Jesus, we've talked about this being the first book written in the New Testament, right? We talked about how it relates to the Sermon on the Mount. There's just going to be even more. Matthew 7's playing out all through this. But as I was getting ready for this, I want us to have that frame of mind, like really. So a lot of us don't like asking for help. Me, I don't like asking for help either. And a lot of times it's my own pride and it's my own fault. I just don't like asking for help. But at the same time, a lot of us, if somebody asks us for help and we know that they were just subtweeting and trashing us on social media and their best friend and they still ask for money from us, you know, they don't ever have money, they go out to eat all the time, right? But then they trash you, right? Like we get upset about it if they ask us. And I'm the same way. But here's the frame of reference I want us to think. How many times do we do that to God? I was just having a conversation talking about, hey, this is my fear and anxiety of this next step. And yet God's probably laughing at me right now saying, you idiot, just trust me. And yes, I know that. I know that's the answer. That's what James is trying to talk about here in James 4. Like, we really want to look at James 4, that's what it is. So when I'm telling you some things, this isn't going to be anything that's groundbreaking, earth-shattering, but it's always going to be something that's a good reminder of where we are, okay? So, if you're taking notes, the first thing, hopefully it'll pop up, is going to be humility. I know you don't see that in your subsection of the NIV or wherever you have NKJV, but it's humility. Humility. And so, before I read this, I want to talk about humility. So I'm changing it up a little bit. I'm going to teach you the point, and then we're going to read it. So, in this world, my pride will give me a view of myself that is incorrect. Sometimes to the good and benefit of me, like I'll say, man, I look good in this shirt. You know, like I like this shirt. I look good in it. Like I'll say that. Or on the back end, it's to the detriment of me, where I will say, I'm beating myself up too much. My pride is I think that I'm higher than I really am. Like, we're all sinners in need of grace. Like, none of us have this figured out. Like, I think myself too highly. Humility. So, humility is the opposite of that. That's pride. Humility is having a true view of yourself. Like, they always talk about all these leadership talks, talk about what's your EQ and your IQ, and those are all great and awesome things, but I think the Bible can teach us more about leadership than anything else in the world. Not that we shouldn't be learning and growing. But that humility matters. And some things that I'm sharing with you, and maybe this is going to hit home with you before we read this, before we read verse 1 through 12, is I've noticed in my walk, some things that I wrote down about myself when I'm following Jesus, is this when it comes to humility. Here's 3 ways that I know I'm being humble. Is I'm willing to listen. If I'm really being humble, I'm willing to listen. If I'm being prideful, I'm interrupting everything you're saying. I'm not listening. I'm talking to you so that I can give you an answer instead of listening to you. So what's my willingness to listen? That's what I noticed about myself. Now maybe that's you, maybe it's not you. I don't know. I'm putting my heart out here and I'm bearing it all out here. This is where I'll notice if I'm in humility, if I'm being humble, I'm willing to listen. The second thing is, what is my attitude towards serving? What's my attitude towards serving? A lot of times if I'm prideful, even now, just had a conversation with you, a lot of times if I'm prideful, sometimes that shows itself in fear and anxiety. I feel like, hey, I'm the only one carrying this. Hey, I'm the only one doing this. Hey, everybody else isn't doing this. So when I'm being humble, I notice my attitude to serving isn't so bad. Like, I'm willing to jump in, I'm willing to say, no, you know, I'm a hard worker. I love jumping in. But that only lasts for a season, right? Sometimes the gas runs out of the engine, right? So I'm noticing in my humility, if I'm humble, my attitude towards serving is really high. It doesn't matter. I'm ready to jump in. I'll do whatever. If you need me to sing, I'll sing. Bless your heart. But it'll be what it'll be, right? And my third one that I'm noticing, and this may go to you, and maybe you can think about as we read through James in a second, how you respond with humility or pride, is my responsiveness to being overlooked. My responsiveness to being overlooked. So what I mean by that when I was writing this was, do I always feel overlooked and undervalued? Do I always feel like I'm worth more than they think I'm worth? Like my worth, not who God says I am, not because we are all of the same value. He died for us all. It's equal at the cross, right? Like all of us were valuable, more valuable than rubies. All of us were more valuable than everything, right? Like Jesus gave his whole life for all of us. But yet so many times if I'm in pride, I think I'm constantly being overlooked. But if I'm in humility, I don't care if I'm overlooked. I'm just thankful I get to be a part. So that's what James is driving to the heart of right here when he's talking about this thing called submission. Because he's talking about submission being a choice. So I'm going to read verses 1 through 12, and then we're going to keep going and rocking and rolling, and then we'll just make it happen, Captain. So verse 1 says this, and hopefully I have it on the Bible app. If not, I'm very sorry. I will try to make sure we stay on that. I think I did. But if you don't, then I'll read it out loud in my best voice possible. Chapter 4, verse 1, NIV version. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire but do not have, so you kill. Have and have-nots. Ever heard that phrase? Right? You desire it, you can't have it, so you kill for it. Remember how powerful your tongue was last week that James just nailed? Talking about life or death with your words and the power of your words and taming your tongue. James goes in to say, you covet, but you cannot get what you want. So you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with the wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasure. So if you're going to the Greek word here, I'll look this up to make sure what James was talking about in this pleasure part, okay? So, I'm probably going to spell this wrong here and say it wrong, but hedon, H-E-D-O-N, if I remember correctly. H-E-D-O-N is the Greek word here. So, how many of us have ever heard of people being hedonistic? Oh, they're just hedonistic. I don't know, maybe that's a big word, that's an SAT word. But it just means people are in it for their own pleasure. When I'm prideful, I'm in it for my pleasure. I'm in it for my glory. I want to be the one running through the sign. I want to be the one that gets to hoist the trophy first. I want to be the one that's the MVP. I want to be the one that's the most paid. I want to be the one on the front page of the news. Like, I want it to be me. Forget everybody else. What James is talking about here is because we don't have that, we'll kill people to get to the front page of the news. We'll kill people to get what we want. We'll kill people to feed that little addiction. We'll tear people down to get what we want. If we need $5, we'll rip somebody apart just to get $5. In the end, is it really worth it? Like, we do that. That's what James is talking about here. As he goes on to that, and he just drops it right here. He says, you adulterous people. And this talks about Hosea. If you look and you can see in the subtext there, he's talking about Hosea and Gomer there, if you've ever read that book. He says, you adulterous people. Don't you know that friendship with the world means enmity against God? So, let's not get that confused. Not enemy, but enmity. There's a difference. An enemy is someone that can be reconciled. Without Christ, we are all enemies with God. We're all enemies with God because we're in sin, correct? So we're at odds with God. We're an enemy of God. But He made a way through Christ that we can be reconciled. Now the difference is an enmity cannot be reconciled. It means you are constantly at odds with. Like, there's no middle ground. There's no way for reconciliation. Like, when you're at enmity with someone, it's not going to be resolved. I see that in the Middle East. When people are at enmity, like you can see two religions fighting back and forth with each other. The Jewish religion and the Islamic religion constantly, they're at enmity with each other, constantly. Like, it doesn't look like there's reconciliation. We know the cross is the reconciliation for all, and that's ultimately what's going to happen in the end times. But when you're at enmity with someone, you can't be reconciled. So James is saying when you chase your pleasures, when you chase sin, you cannot be reconciled with God. You know that, right? Like, I think we know that. That sometimes I don't live that way, correct? Or do you think Scripture says without reason that He jealously longs for the Spirit that He has caused to dwell in us, but He gives us more grace? This is what Scripture said. God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. I'm going to give you something to read here, outside of the Matthew 7. I told you that's kind of where James is right here in Matthew 7, talking about the Sermon on the Mount. In your own time, read Luke 18, verse 9 through 14. Luke 18, verse 9 through 14. And this story will talk to you about the proud Pharisee and this tax collector that comes in and says, God have mercy on me, I don't deserve to be here. And that's when Jesus is talking about those who have humility will be exalted, and those who exalt themselves will be humbled. Right? So go back and read that and see where you are operating out of humility or pride. So then James goes on in verse 7 and says, submit yourself then to God. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. Come near to God and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify. Well, wash the hands tonight. I saw some people at the sink. We did. Okay. Check. Wash your hands, you sinners, you filthy sinners. They didn't say filthy. But anyway, wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Grieve, mourn, and wail. He goes hardcore, doesn't he? Change your laughter to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. I think if you're looking there, James is, if you look at the bottom in verse 6, he was in Proverbs when he was pulling that verse out of opposing the proud. I think he's really in Psalm when he's talking about how David was there at that moment after he got found out. Got a baby mama, killed a man in the field, Uriah is dead, all this crazy stuff. And he was in wailing and mourning till the baby died, right? And then it changed to joy all of a sudden. Because he humbled himself and he confessed his sin. Brothers and sisters, do not slander one another. Anyone who speaks out against a brother or sister or judges them speaks against the law and judges it. When you judge the law, you are not keeping it, but sitting in judgment on it. As we keep saying, it's something Jesus just constantly reminded me of, because Billy Graham said it. And it's just crazy. It's just crazy. It's God's job to judge, the Holy Spirit's job to convict, and my job to love. When I'm judging someone, I'm trying to take God's job from him, and that is pride. Period. It is pride. It's pride. It is not humility. It's pride. Therefore, there's only one lawgiver and one judge, the one who is able to save and destroy. But you, who are you to judge your neighbor? So that was good and boosting, right? Like James just goes to the heart of it, right? But like it made me think about maybe where you are, and we'll talk here in a little bit with the questions as we get to come together, is I wonder where you are. Do you operate out of humility or pride? Maybe it's not every area of your life. Maybe it's not. I know some areas of my life I'm very humble. Some areas of my life I'm really prideful. I need help. I need to get there. I have a Pharisee heart. I've been there. Get really prideful. So I wonder maybe where you are, and that's what James is trying to show you. If you are, humble yourself, confess your sin to God, obviously, repent of it, but also you've got brothers and sisters around you to confess that to. That's where that famous verse comes in next week in James 5:16, where your prayer can be heard, right? So I wonder if that's where we are, if we're in pride or humility, because that'll always determine how we love God, love others. So next. Then we'll be done. There's the quiet. Wish I had like a board and I could write neatly, but you've seen my handwriting, so I won't act like I did. Dependence. So James 4 is about humility and dependence. Humility and dependence. Not independence, dependence. Dependence. Humility and dependence. Humility and dependence. So if you get here and you're looking at this, I just want to bring us back to something. So if you're looking at the title, it says boasting about tomorrow. But I want to bring us back to the Garden of Eden, right? And this is where James is going back to, okay? So I want us to have that perspective. The Garden of Eden is where he's talking about boasting about tomorrow. So here we go. Now listen, you who say today or tomorrow we will go out to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Why do you not even know what will happen tomorrow? What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. Doesn't mean we don't plan. Jesus said make plans. He said, how stupid would you be if you went to build a house and you didn't have a plan before you did it and you ran out of money before it was complete? It's not wisdom. What this means is you seek God from the beginning and you really understand that He knows the end from the beginning instead of you inviting Him in halfway through to figure out the end, because you began it yourself. I'm going to point out what that means in Eden here in a second. If anyone then knows good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. It is sin for them. So, before we end up here and we have questions, this is what I'm getting at when he's talking about boasting. Don't say, that doesn't mean you're lazy and you don't have a plan. My question is, where's God in your plan? Because pridefully, I'll go start something on my own and ask God to intervene halfway through. Humbly, I'll ask God what his plan is and how I can play a part. What happened in the Garden of Eden is man realized that they weren't dependent upon God. We tried to be self-reliant. We tried to be about ourselves. We tried to stand in the judgment seat. Remember what Satan did is he rolls in, he slithers in and says, did God really say that he would kill you if you ate of that tree? No, you're his prized possession, right? Like, he's not going to kill you. Isn't that how sin kind of creeps in and slithers and slides its way in to what you have? So I wonder if we're looking at humility and dependence is the opposite of having pride and self-reliance. Because if we're operating in self-reliance, we'll tell God we know what's best for us. That's what Adam and Eve did. That fruit was pleasing. It was great to the eye. The apple didn't kill me when I first ate it. And I'm going to share it with somebody else, and it's going to be even better. And then we're going to realize we're naked. We're going to sew some fig leaves together. And it's going to be crazy. And then we're going to run from God and get out of his presence. And then all of a sudden we're going to realize the huge mistake we made. So I wonder in our day-to-day lives, how do we live? In dependence upon God's will be done, with humility, asking him how we will be a part of it. Or are we in sin like the garden where we're prideful and saying, God, I got this. I just need you to play this part in it. Like I said, example. God, hey, I'm going to start my own business. I just need you to figure out the finances of it. I've got everything else though. I got everything else though. I already got the marketing plan. I've already got the scheme. I got it going, right? Like, isn't that hard? Because you say, well, I'm not lazy. I work hard. But the thing is, when I make the plan and then ask God to bless it, instead of God, your will already lead to blessing, what role do I play in it? Show me your will. Show me your plan. That's the difference of being in the Garden of Eden versus the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus said, I know the plan, God. If this cup can pass over me, let it. But thy will be done. Like, I already know the end from the beginning. So I wonder how many times in our life we get that way. I'm learning that as I go. As I was reading the book of James, that question just kept popping in my mind is, do you trust God that he knows the end of what's going to happen from the beginning because your life is but a mist? Or do you try to begin your life on your own and ask God to play out the end? And I wonder where that sits with us. It's hard, isn't it? Hey, relationships are that way, right? Like, I know, marriage coming up, should we do it? It's message content for later. But like, really, like, saying those things, like, isn't that what happens with relationships? Business relationships especially. Like, you get all giddy, you get all excited, you partner together, you got this great plan, and you haven't sought God's will for it. Then all of a sudden it goes bankrupt, you hate each other, you can't talk to each other anymore, you feel crazy about everything. Sometimes that can happen. So the question is, do we learn from it or do we stay in it? It's the hard part. I wish I could tell you that I learned from it every time because I haven't. I wish I could tell you that's it. 12 marriages and 15 kids later now. For real though, you know better than that. It's 20 kids. For real better than that. That's kind of where I was. So when I wrote this down, it made me think about that. I wonder how many times is my pride saying that I'm self-reliant, that I can do this. Because you know what? This body breaks down. It deteriorates. I'm learning that. I'm a man in my 30s. And I'm not that old. I don't have the creaks and cracks of the 40s that I hear about. I hear about the 40s and the 50s going that way. Yes. But I also have this thing all of a sudden, like, maybe it's midlife, maybe it's just Jesus growing in me, but I realize that my time on earth is limited. And this body will fail me. Eventually it will fail me. Now I have to steward it well. Can't always say I've done that, but I have to steward it well. But in the meantime, I got to trust God's will be done inside of that stewardship, right? Not that he'll bless me just because I stewarded well. It's that it was his will to bless me all along. And so I stewarded that of obedience because I love him. Not because I just want him to bless me. So my question is, are you in humility or pride? And are you in self-reliance or dependence? So here's the questions I have for us tonight, and then we'll be done. Because this is the hard part. How can we love people, love the truth, yet at the same time not be judgmental toward them? In other words, I don't have kids yet, so parents, you get this. How many times are you going to tell the child not to make the same mistake? Stop touching the oven. Stop touching the oven. It's hot. Stop touching the oven. That's what we've all been through as a child. Yeah.
You'll learn.
Right. Like how many times do we keep saying that? Or how many times do we keep saying, don't go back to this? Can't you see this? Can't you see this? Like, that's ministry. That's what happens in life. But how do we love people through that without sounding judgmental? Because remember, it's God's job to judge, the Holy Spirit's job to convict, ours to love. So how the heck do we love them? Yeah, it's not pride. So basically how to do that in humility. And then right now, and this is something I've just been trying to work through myself. It's something we don't have to talk about out loud, but it's something you can maybe ask somebody to pray for you for, somebody you trust. But is there something specific God's currently speaking to you about doing? Because James ends it so beautifully. So many times we're scared because we know the plans of God and we don't think we can execute them. But that's a faith issue. You just got to trust it. That's where you don't see your worth pridefully in the wrong way. You just got to humble yourself and trust it. But on the back end, so many times we know what to do and we know the right thing to do, yet we choose not to do it. It's those things too that we say, I swore that last time I did that was going to be the last time. And here I am again. And then special brownies are on the counter. And it's just one of them things, right? Like, the last time was the last time. And when we're in sin, we're not an enemy of God. We're in enmity with God. We cannot be reconciled. Only through Christ have we been reconciled. Yes, He died for our sins. Yes, we have grace upon grace and mercy. But if we continue to know what's right and choose not to do it, number one, we affect those around us. Because their view of Jesus is wrong, because all they see is your sin, not Jesus in you.